Okay, hi everyone. Welcome to the Richard Dolan Show, where we all fight the good fight. Happy to be here with you. I want to say a big hello to the chat family. I know you're all out there. I can see you scurrying about in the margins there. Hello, big hello to all of you. Before I start, I just will say I've been looking at the numbers here for this YouTube channel, and man, oh man, we are just below the 100,000 mark for subscribers to this channel. Wouldn't it be nice to get to that nice round number? So if you come here every now and then, and if you're not a subscriber already, hey, why not hit that subscribe button? Let's get to 100K. I think that'd be pretty nice. Also, you know how the evil algorithms are at war with, alternative anything these days, and that includes the content on this channel. So it's always nice to gently push, or if you like, smash the like button. That does help the algorithms, helps me with the algos anyway. And don't forget to turn on notifications for this channel so you don't miss any new programs when I do have them. And I just want to say, I'm sure a lot of you are wondering, like, why isn't Dolan on YouTube as much as he used to be? And the thing is, I am very, very busy these days, but it's mostly at my website, which is Richard Dolan Members. I do video content multiple times every week. I do audio content, like audio podcasts, and I do a lot of written content all the time. I'm writing articles and various thought pieces. So I'm actually very active. Plus, I am actively working on volume 3 of my series of UFOs and the national security state. I may be able to chat a little bit about that in the course of this talk here with you today. But my point is, I'm definitely doing a lot. I'm just doing less here on YouTube. And, I have a weird relationship with YouTube these days. I love it. It's nice being on here, and I like connecting with all of you. But YouTube is weird, and increasingly, I just find it to be less and less of an environment that I feel comfortable talking about all the things that I like to talk about. I still do it, but I can assure you I am vastly more active over at Richard Dolan Members. I do have a lot of free content there, so if you don't want to pay for a membership, I get that. There's still content there. Most of what I do is for members of the site, but it's cheap. $7 a month. You can do that if you decide. Anyway, that's where I'm at. So in case you're wondering, that is the answer. Now, what I want to talk about today is, this is actually something that I did create for my website a few days ago, and I decided to take that presentation and tweak it a bit for you here on YouTube. And it really came about because I was, as I often do, going through the news. I read news headlines pretty much every morning. And just a few days ago, I'm going through the headlines, and it was just insane numbers of articles dealing with just protests around the world. Just like from Los Angeles to Portland. Well, always Portland. There's always something going on there. Minneapolis, where they got their own autonomous zone there now, to New York, and then throughout to the UK, where there's serious activity going on after the awful death of that poor woman, and that's caused a lot of activity going on there, to Liège in Belgium, throughout Germany, to Copenhagen in Denmark. Southern Hemisphere is Argentina. Something big was going on there recently. And honestly, just dozens more around the world, all happening at the same time. And the causes aren't all the same. There are different reasons for those causes. Some are anti-lockdown protests, like you get in Germany. Others are just straight up Antifa, like in Portland. And some are more BLM, like in New York or LA or even Copenhagen. Some are environmental, like in Argentina. And some are just anti-police, like you're getting in the UK right now. So it's actually impossible even to keep up with all of these on a daily basis. I would say it's almost impossible. Plus, like most Western news media is very selective in reporting this. Like some things will get reported if it fits a certain narrative, but other things do not get reported, and you really have to hunt for them. But there's clearly this sense of the world ripping apart at the seams. It's like just a world divided against itself. And then on top of that, like, you really have to ask, are we looking at an impending economic meltdown? And this is a real possibility. I mean, something far worse than even what we have seen in the last year, right? I mean, the U.S. government is just now spending another $1.9 trillion, just conjuring up out of thin air to pay for people whose lives have been shut down, whose economies have been destroyed because there's nothing else for them. And so there's money going to people. Last year, I think the number was something on the order of $4 trillion that was spent, that I don't want to say spent, that was invented out of nothing. That was, I think, 25% of the entire U.S. money supply last year was just created. So that's a debt bomb that is, so 4 trillion plus another 2 trillion now. And you realize, like, this 1.9 trillion this is just the first down payment on what we're going to be looking at throughout the rest of this year. I mean, will be another 2 trillion, 3 trillion, 4, 5 trillion more that will be just, what are they? Money printer goes, brrr, that's what people are saying. And how much more? And this is, you can say, well, it's necessary because people aren't allowed to work. They're not able to have a living really any longer the way we used to. So you've got to pay people something to survive. And that is true. But this is a debt bomb that has to be paid for. And I mean, we're really now at the point where I think most even economists and financial experts realize, like, there's no solution any longer to the debt problem. It cannot be solved. So somehow there's going to be, and so whenever that happens, if there is a true economic meltdown, we have to assume that the social strife that we are seeing everywhere in the world is only going to get worse. And, way back when in the 1850s, Abraham Lincoln famously, quoting the Bible, actually said that a house divided against itself cannot stand. And I believe that. And so that I am of the opinion personally that what we are experiencing right now in this world cannot last forever. It cannot go on indefinitely. Something is going to have to give. And I'm going to come back to that theme before I'm done here. Before I get into that, though, this is also a UFO chat. So it's a little bit of both. I want to talk about the global situation, but I do want to keep it also, I don't want to lose sight of discussing the implications for the UFO problem. And the UFO phenomenon is a problem. It always has been. But one thing I just want to say here is that this is something I've noticed for many years. By the way, I've got a little cup of yerba mate here, so I'm going to take some sips every now and then because it's perfectly hot. I don't want to lose that. But one thing I've noticed for many years, at least 15 years now, and I've talked about this many times at various conferences, has been my observation that at many times, let's say at a number of times in our past, that political crises in society has at times led to significant openings in UFO information. Now, not every time. So there have been a number of instances where societies have gone through major crises and UFO data did not come out, okay? But there have been cases in which it has. And in a few cases, fairly significantly so. The example that I always like to use the most when I would talk about this would probably be the old Soviet Union. And in the case of the Soviet Union, as that nation state was ripping apart all through the late 1980s, and it dissolved at the end of 1991. During that period, it was like rats jumping off a sinking ship. And one of the things that came out was a significant cache of UFO data, most famously in what's known as the KGB Blue Files. The lot of powerful information about Soviet military UFO encounters, particularly with around the country. It was an amazing one that was in Kapustin Yar that's their main rocket center back in July of 1989. That was just unbelievable. Attempted intercepts of several extraordinary objects that were just hanging out there late at night. There was another significant event that happened not that far from Moscow in March of 1990. These all, in my view, like they would never have come out in the earlier period of Soviet history when that government had a much firmer control over everything that was coming out of the society. But by the late 80s, things were just falling to pieces. And so information was coming out. It was an amazing opening of UFO data that researchers have been able to access ever since. It's quite extraordinary. Another example, an earlier example, maybe not quite as dramatic, but still a legitimate one, would be China. And that's after the death of Mao Zedong in 1976. The next leader of China was Deng Xiaoping, and he created or initiated a significant liberalization of Chinese society. And one of many results of that was some decent UFO information coming out of that country. There was a Chinese researcher back then known as Paul Dong, who wrote some very fine books on Chinese UFOs that could never have come out during the Mao era. But there was a significant change of regimes after Mao died, and it caused some turbulence in that society that allowed for some of this information to come out. There's another example, again, not as dramatic as the Soviet example, but that of Spain, the nation of Spain. And similar as with Mao, Francisco Franco, the man who was dictator of Spain for over 40 years, died, I think, in 1975. And it wasn't long after that Spanish society significantly started to liberalize as well. One of many things that happened was the release of several hundred very interesting Spanish military UFO encounters. And again, this is just something that could not have happened under the old days of Franco, but with a big transformation of the political infrastructure in the society, it was able to happen. And maybe the last example, and a pretty good one, is that of the United States nearly 50 years ago after Watergate and Vietnam, really the 1-2 whammy of crisis that was happening to the U.S. back in the early 70s. The presidency of Richard Nixon was definitely in some trouble, as we all know. But one of the last significant acts of the Nixon presidency was a major strengthening and overhaul of the Freedom of Information Act. This actually happened under Nixon, and then it was further strengthened under President Jimmy Carter a couple of years later. And I think indirectly that also led to a significant opening for UFO data, because through FOIA, this is an amazing thing that really happened in American history. I don't think anyone was expecting this, but probably the leading FOIA subject in those early years was UFO requests. And there were a number of UFO researchers in the late 70s who really used freedom of information to the max and got thousands of pages of very interesting documents on the UFO subject released to the world. I mean, it's really an amazing thing. And in fact, this is why I subtitled my second volume of UFOs in the National Security State, The Cover-Up Exposed. It's not that the cover-up ended in the 1970s and 80s. It didn't, obviously. But it was exposed through FOIA. In other words, all of the previous denials of the CIA and the FBI and all the Army agencies and the military agencies, all of those became shown to be complete lies. And it was proven, not suggested, not hinted, but it was absolutely proven that they were very engaged with the UFO reality and were actively covering up, hence the cover-up exposed. Like, we exposed that thing at the time. It was amazing. So all of these things happened as sometimes directly, but at least in part as a response to significant political crises that happened in various countries. Now, again, a lot of examples in which that did not happen, so it's not a sure thing, right? But it was quite significant. Now, you might ask, so information got released, but it didn't really result in disclosure. It didn't result in the end of UFO secrecy, not in any of those societies. And why didn't it? And that's a really good question. And my own speculation on that is simply that in all of those countries, you could say the media was under sufficient domination by powerful established interests, corporate and political interests, national security interests, that they were really very successful at keeping that whole narrative very, very under wraps. I mean, there was not a whole lot of discussion in the US or in these other countries about UFOs. In the case of Soviet Union and the nations that broke out of the Soviet Union, Russia and Kazakhstan and Ukraine and all the others, one of the reasons is that they were simply dealing with a massive national crisis all through the 1990s when life expectancy plummeted. And I mean, people were having trouble getting food on the table. Russian mafia was taking over under Yeltsin. US was totally happy about that, by the way. But the fact is that the Russians and people of the old Soviet Union had more than enough to worry about than, gee, I wonder if UFOs are real, and this is interesting information. And, I think that happened probably in all of these countries. There's always other things that are on the table in front that are of immediate concern. And that's going to factor into what I'm going to be talking about here tonight, like the world in crisis and all of that. So there was no breakthrough. It didn't happen. So let's go back to our own time now. So there's a lot of things we can ask about all of the things going on in the world today in terms of this unbelievable level of political and ideological polarization that is obviously everywhere around us. And by the way, I'm not even taking, at least here, I'm not taking sides in who I think is right and who I think is wrong. So please don't try to pin me on that. I'm not going to go there. What I want to do here is observe, and we can analyze this together without getting into finger wagging moralism one way or the other. I really don't think we're helping ourselves with that right now. But what we can ask, what I would like to ask here, is why has the current political social crisis happened? Like, we've obviously gotten into something very serious all around the world. And I mean, there's a lot of questions we can ask, but I want to ask why. And I was thinking about this over the last few days. Why? Why does the world feel like it's upside down? And why is everyone so upset with each other? So I believe that there are certain immediate reasons and there are certain fundamental reasons. So one immediate reason, let's go back a few years, maybe the earliest immediate reason. We'll go back, let's say 5 years to 2 elections. There's Brexit and the election of Donald Trump. So in the UK and in the US, those 2 elections, they all happened very close together. And I think we can see them as simply, variations of a theme here, one cause, very closely related. And I think those elections helped to crystallize very clear dividing lines, right? That became, unfortunately, I think they became interpreted primarily in cultural terms. And I say unfortunately because I think, truthfully, both of those events signified much broader and deeper economic and political and geopolitical realities that people were actually reacting about, rather than culture. And I'm not going to even get into all the cultural stuff here. That's a minefield. And here on YouTube especially, thanks, I'll pass. But I will say that I think the fact that those events became interpreted in primarily cultural terms is very unfortunate for us, because it really clouded our analytical ability to understand really more accurately what was going on. And I say this because I believe that everything around those 2 elections, and I haven't gotten to COVID yet, so we're going to get there too, but this divided world syndrome that we're experiencing, in my view anyway, is basically about our response to globalization on a much more profound, broad sense here. And also what I have been lately calling our movement into a new fourth stage of humanity. All right. This is something I wrote quite a lot about in my most recent book called The Alien Agendas. And I have a long discussion of that in that particular book. I have also talked about this a lot on my website at Richard Dolan Members. So the folks over there, they know this full well. But to summarize it, I guess what I will just maintain is that my view is that when I look at the long history of our species, the hundreds of thousands of years that human beings have existed now, that we know we have existed, up until now, we've had, I would say, fundamentally 3 basic modes of existence of social organization. I mean, yes, there's been lots of ways you can split those and lots of variations in there, okay? But on a fundamental level, I would say there have been 3. And for the longest time, that was hunting and gathering. That's how humans lived in small groups, like 50 people in a group maybe, and just that's how they were. And you'd have your group here, and 20 miles over there would be another group, another 50 people, and so on. And that's how we existed for most of our existence. And then roughly about 10,000 years ago, we went through a transition to our second stage of existence, which we can call sedentary agriculture and domestication of plants and animals. That gave us our first cities. That gave us writing. That gave us the wheel. That gave us all the inventions, most of the inventions that we then used to create what we call civilization. It gave us everything from ancient Egypt to the Roman Empire to the Renaissance and everything else. That's stage 2. And that's a very active stage. A lot was going on there. But then we got to stage 3, which happened only a couple of centuries ago, a couple of 100 years ago, which I call the age of science and industry. So, Rene Descartes, Isaac Newton, Galileo, and then the British Industrial Revolution and the transformation of our world based on totally new principles that caused a completely new way to organize human society, and even the human mind became a very different, different sets of ideas that really informed our sense of reality. That's stage 3. And that's the stage that we were all born into, every one of us. And my argument is that we are now moving to stage 4. And I don't know how long it will take to complete that. Maybe a century, maybe less, don't know. I think these transformations are happening faster and faster. And stage 4, I don't really know if I've got the best name for it. I originally called it the transhumanist stage. But doesn't really cover everything. In the immediate future, you might just call it the 5G 24/7 surveillance stage, in which everyone is bagged and tagged and digitized and commodified and managed digitally. And then you could call it the digital stage. Maybe that's a way to call it. But I think you can see where I'm going here, that this new stage is already beginning to completely transform the very fundamentals of how human beings live and interact with each other and live out our lives and even make our money and get food on our table and all of that stuff. I think all of these fundamentals are changing. And that will go right down to fundamentals of human psychology as well. I think all of this is going through this very significant transformation. Globalization is, one of the key drivers to move us into that transformation. All right. And I'm going to come back to the internet because that's another one. But as far as immediate causes of the ripping apart at the seams syndrome that we're seeing, certainly the COVID pandemic and the response, especially the lockdowns, I think have been a very huge factor in moving and accelerating that transformation. And, obviously, I think when you look back on 2020, all the protests and riots or both that took place around the world in the US and everywhere were certainly sometimes caused directly by, or if not caused by, then are exacerbated by the lockdowns. It's really easy to get more and more angry when you don't have a job anymore and you don't have financial security anymore, in which the ground's been taken out from underneath you. So it makes it much more easy to say, hey, you know, this system totally sucks. Let's take it down. So I think the lockdowns, it would be fair to say, probably severely exacerbated the anger factor that people are feeling. That's obvious. And aside from the fact that they've just destroyed entire national economies around the world. I mean, that's, you know, these small businesses and mid-sized businesses that are down, they're not, many of them are not going to come back. And so we have completely gone through this kind of self-immolation of our global economy, and how that will come back, when that will come back, to what degree it will come back, who knows? I don't know. It won't come back to the way it was before. You know, clearly we're seeing massive, major corporate consolidation of market share around all of these places where the little guys are getting squeezed out. So whenever it comes back, we're going to see a very different kind of economy, you know, and marked by, you know, much greater universal basic income and things like that. Like that's all of that's happening. So this massive transition, globalization, and then internet. Let me just do internet too. All of these are causing rapid change and rapid anxiety among people. So it's just exacerbating things. But with internet, you can say for the last 25 years now, we've had this thing that we call the internet, and it's been an amazing thing, right? It's and I mean, how can we understate the power of what the internet has done to our world? It's impossible to understate that, or to overstate that. I don't know how I say that. Anyway, you get what I mean. And in the 90s, you know, I remember this quite well. I'm sure many of you do. When the internet was this new thing, and it was kind of like the Wild West, you know, of ideas, and like anything seemed possible. That was an amazing thing. But what we now can see has happened is, aside from the fact that it's becoming more and more controlled, we're going to return to that too, but it is also, it kind of helped us to create a splintering of consensus in society. Not that we ever had true consensus prior to the 90s. There's always been dissent, obviously. But I think we can see that with the internet, the capability of people to just go their own way and not be beholden to mainstream narratives, well, that just went, you know, that became a completely new possibility now for so much of the world, increasingly all the world. So, but one result that I don't think we were able to foresee way back in the 90s was this kind of what we can call maybe a new tribalism. Yeah, a new tribalism. I actually really believe now that tribalism is a fundamental element of the human psychology. You know, of late, just in my spare time, I've been really trying to delve into human prehistory. I've been reading a bunch of books on it. It's just fascinating to me, trying to understand our own long trek from hunters and gatherers and our transformation to, you know, our first cities. And what I have learned is that, you know, the tribe is, it's really a fundamental element of how we have evolved to exist within that. You know, like I was just saying before, you know, typically people would live in small groups, maybe 50, maybe 100 people, maybe up to 200 people in the later phase of hunting and gathering. So that's a tribe. That's a tribe. And if you were in that environment, you would live your entire life, okay, with this group of people. And you would know them, every one of them, really well, because those are all the people in your world. You know, and you might have some trade once in a while with that group over there and this group over here. those outsiders, okay? And you'd have your tribal group. And so that was your identity. And that was the identity of people. And I now believe that, that sense of tribal identity is what would help give people that sense of stability in their world, that sense of belonging, that sense of having the ground underneath your feet, something to walk on, your tribe, who you are. These are my people, and that sort of thing. And what we can see over in our civilization for especially the last century, is a definite wearing down of that sense of the community. Even when we developed the age of agriculture and even the early age of industry, there was still that sense of tribalism. People still had their communities. People still had, their extended families. And there was always that sense of continuity that typically existed. But I think in the last few generations, we've seen increasingly that has really been wearing away. So, and the other thing that I've come to understand is that we as a species, as a people, there are two fundamental things that I think we actually all crave. That's novelty and stability. They're two different things, right? We're curious creatures, so we like new things. We like to experience new knowledge and new experiences that are exciting, that we really get into. But we also really want that stability. We want that sense of continuity. And so you could almost say that the balancing act of human civilization is figuring out how to balance those two things: novelty, the liberal part of us; stability, the conservative part of us. Like, they're both important. That's why really every society needs liberals and conservatives. Like, you really can't just have one. It's not healthy only to have one. I think we crave both. So anyway, I guess what I'm saying here is that the rate of change over the last few generations has been very great. I think we can all see that. So we're not short of novelty, and all the novelty we want. You go to your Facebook feed and just scroll. You go to the YouTube feed on my phone, like I've got my YouTube app like you do. And there's this evil genius that they really come up with here. You go and you scroll down and it never stops. Like, they just keep you there. So there's constant new things for you to go look at. Look at this. So there's no loss of novelty, but there is a loss of stability that many people increasingly are feeling. And so I believe what that has led to in this fracturing of the last bits of consensus that we may have had in the 90s is a new tribalism. And because we need the tribalism, we need that sense of belonging. And so what are the new tribes now? Well, the new tribes are ideological. That's what they are. They're ideological. So they, political and ideological, but basically that's what they are. And so you find your identity more and more through your ideology, or people talk about identitarianism. It's the same thing. That's your tribe. That's your community. That gives you what we crave, in that sense of stability that we all really desperately want. Now, whether or not that can actually be a true substitute for the long-standing human connections of family and lifelong friends and things like that people used to have, that are really very difficult now in our world today for us to maintain, that's a really good question. My suspicion is that the ideological tribes are not really a fully emotionally satisfying substitute for that need for belonging, but be that as it may. So I think, this is the result. What we're seeing now, all of this fighting against each other, is really the result of these immediate causes like COVID, lockdown, the Brexit and Trump elections that really crystallize things, combined with long-term fundamental factors like globalization, like internet, like essentially the whole direction of moving us into what I keep calling the fourth stage of humanity. And I think it's caused a crystallization, dividing lines, fighting lines to be drawn. And so, and again, I'm not even here to take sides one way or the other. Like for my part, I don't have a difficult time seeing the perspectives of these various different sides, right? And I think we really make a mistake, frankly, when we moralistically condemn the other side that we tend to disagree with. I think that's a really dangerous thing to do, because it takes away from an accurate analytical approach to understanding this, and because it's really easy to get on your high horse and get all sanctimonious about the people that are bad people. Like, being sanctimonious is really easy, but it doesn't help. It doesn't help us understand, and it doesn't help fix the problem either, because it doesn't help getting those people to listen to you, when you go off and condemn them, whether you're on the right or the left. So that's a bit of a problem. But here's what I really want to get to now. We're in this crisis. We're in it. It's here. It's not going away. And by the way, we're coming back to UFOs, so hold on to that thought, okay? But the question that I'm asking right now is, where will this crisis lead? Where is it going to lead? Because it can't maintain itself like this indefinitely. I just cannot believe that. I think it can get a lot worse. Yes, good chance that it will. So if we think we're at a crisis point now, I don't think we are yet at the crisis point. And I don't know when we will hit it. I don't know. I shudder to think how severe it can be when we get to it, but I don't think we're there yet. So what will it lead to? Well, what I think it's going to lead to is a crackdown. I think that's what it's going to lead to. I think it'll lead to some kind of global crackdown. In other words, global elites, if we want to call them that, yes, I think we should, ready to make the move to regain total control over the situation again. All right. Good example, I think, anyone could have predicted this. I predicted it, was Hong Kong. Just, a couple of years ago, when Hong Kong was going in full anti-China mode, anti-Beijing mode, with massive riots and protests every single day. Was it really that difficult for anyone to predict what was going to happen? The inevitable result is that the Chinese government was just going to come in and bring the hammer down, which of course they did. Like, that was the easiest thing. Yes, the US, CIA, and all the intelligence agencies were promoting that in Hong Kong. I think we all know that now. But could they not see what it was going to lead to? There was no way that could be successful, in my opinion. I just never saw success there. And I think that example is very likely the most probable model for what we are going to see eventually throughout the world. Now, I don't think we're going to see that for a few years yet, because the global digital infrastructure is not quite there yet. Our window is still open. And this also includes the UFO disclosure window. It's still open for a while. That window is closing. So meanwhile, what we have is a situation where you've got insurgents, you've got revolutionaries on one side trying to basically destroy the system. Some of them are anyway. Not all of them. Some want to reform the system. Some want to just destroy it. I can even understand why they want to. I don't agree with them, but I can understand, to the extent of, you're someone who feels like there's no future for you, and that the system as it is taking all of that future away from you. You may or may not be able to analyze it properly. Not everyone does analyze it properly, in my opinion. But the fact that you see your future being taken away from you gives you an enemy, of sorts, whether it's, could be just the system in general, could be capitalism, could be globalization, could be whatever. But you want to just then take that system down. Like the Luddites hundreds of years ago wanted to stop English industrialization by, screwing up the machinery and all of that. Same thing here. So I can understand that. But my take on that is the reason that I don't think a revolution can win, I don't think it's possible for it to win, is that because I don't really see a plan or a method by which such a revolution can actually work. I don't see how many autonomous zones you can create that's really going to be economically viable for a long period of time. Like, that's just not going to work. In the global system by which people grow food, transport food, make their living, and survive, I just don't see how most of these revolutionary and often utopian types of schemes can actually succeed. And I've never seen any of them that actually has a bona fide plan by which anything's actually going to happen in a believable way. So that's my opinion. When I look at the plans, I just don't see any success there. So I think, what we're looking at is a clampdown, a crackdown. And now, back to the UFO disclosure. This is something that I will just say I foresaw more than a decade ago in relationship to the challenges of UFO disclosure. Back in 2010, Bryce Zabel and I wrote the book AD After Disclosure, and it was the first, and to my understanding, still the only full book-length attempt to really try to grapple with the question of, can UFO secrecy ever end? How might it end if it were to end? And if it did end, what then? Like, how would it rock our world? And so we sat down over a decade ago now, and we tried to act like we were a think tank, and we tried to game plan the scenarios. And that's that book. Now, in writing that book, and then in the immediate aftermath of that book, I gave a lot of lectures about what I used to call scenarios of disclosure. And back then, like in 2010, 2011, probably 2012, I game planned like 4 different basic scenarios that I saw potential for a real ending of UFO secrecy. The one that I was always rooting for, that I was always hoping for, but I didn't really quite believe, something I called people-driven disclosure. Has a great sound to it. Yay, the people, we're going to... And the idea of that was that, we, the public, the people, would be able to get access to enough UFO information, powerful information, and with the new global infrastructure that existed, to share that information in a powerful way that would force the issue out into the front of the public, where we would say, oh my God, you have been lying to us for 70 years, an entire human lifetime. What's going on with that? What else have you been lying about? And by the way, what does this say about the entire structure of secrecy? How have you been able to keep this secret from us? So my reasoning was that if we could get to a people-driven disclosure, right, that it could jumpstart a more widespread, a global democratic movement. I guess that's what I was kind of thinking of it in that way. And then on the opposite end of it, I envisioned what I, for a while, used to call fascist disclosure. And then I think I changed it up to controlled disclosure. I gave it other names. But the idea of that is a much more ominous. And even back then, I always gave that one, I said, that's the favorite. That's the one that's most likely to happen. And fascist disclosure, we can call it that, I guess, was if the global power structure gets to the finish line first. In other words, by that I mean, if they were able to get to a position in which they have full, total control not only over legacy establishment media, which they already had in 2010, that was already there, you know, New York Times, CBS, Fox, CNN, all of that was already being spoon-fed information by the national security state already and just spitting it out for us. But also control over alternative media. So the web, internet, social media, which in 2010 wasn't really fully the case. And so my reasoning was, if they get to that level of control before we achieve a people-driven disclosure, right, then that's trouble. Because then you have the likelihood of a total control over a global narrative that would be increasingly difficult to break. And so in that situation, I reasoned that at some point, like, there would be a perceived need, even by the global power structure, to give up some information on UFOs, because just too much would be coming out. But it would allow them the ability to parcel out that information and spoon feed us just enough to, keep people in abeyance for a long enough period of time. Like, the best way to keep it secret, pretend to share it. And so I thought, if we lose this foot race with the power structure, if the people lose the race to the finish line and they get there first and they control all global media, then we're going to have a troubling situation. So all of this I was talking about more than 10 years ago, which kind of amazes me when I think back on it now. And I think what we can see is that it kind of looks like they got to the finish line first. And if there's one thing that I'm going to completely admit here that I'm surprised by, is the speed by which that has happened. Back in 2010 and 2011, I would not have said it would happen within 5 to 7 to 8 years, which it did. It really did. I would have given it a little more time. So that's my error. That's probably a lot of people. I have to think I'm not the only one who was caught off guard by the swiftness, by the breathtaking speed by which global digital media was consolidated in terms of control. It was kind of amazing. Even by 2015, you could really see that this is almost a done deal. Before Brexit, before Trump, I think it was already pretty much there. And then it just sped up so rapidly in the last 5-6 years since then. So here's the thing. When we wrote After Disclosure back in 2010, imagine, like, all the revelations that we've had in the last 3.5 years, since 2017, in terms of UFO, have been extraordinary. There's really no way to deny this. There has been an extraordinary amount of confirmed information about UFOs, or UAP, if you want to call them that has come out. That if I were to, go back to 2010, and if someone were to tell me in 2010 that the Navy's going to admit that they have UFO encounters, the Pentagon will admit that, yes, they have a UFO organization known as ATIP that is actively studying UFOs right now, that the military is going to admit that they have these encounters and they don't know what the hell these things are, that all the encounters of, like, the Tic Tac UFO encounter, which has been fully admitted to, that all the extraordinary encounters of the USS Roosevelt in 2014, 2015, hundreds of encounters that they have acknowledged that they've had in a 9-month period of time, according to the New York Times. And so much else, all the videos, all this discussion of the metamaterial. Hal Puthoff's unbelievable lecture that he gave that was put on Vimeo in 2018 on the qualities of that. Like, just mind-blowing stuff. If someone had said to me back in 2010 that this was coming out, I would have thought, and I bet my co-author Bryce would have thought, that will cause the avalanche. That's just too much. You cannot deny that anymore. And so that was certainly my governing assumption back then. That was in the before times, before we achieved some level of what we now really can call a global digital totalitarian system. That is, it's not full blown yet, but it's obviously, it's all around us. Like, you can obviously see it. So I think, why didn't the avalanche effect happen after 2017? Like, that's a really important question. Why did it not happen? Because one would have thought that it could have been enough. Certainly awe-inspiring, powerful revelations that it came out. And I think there's two answers that I can think of. And one is what I've kind of been talking about here, which is the consolidation of control over global digital media, and primarily through social media, which back in 2010, one could still see as a kind of avenue for some freedom, right? Which by 2017, no, just not. I mean, even here on YouTube, dare I say, like, any fringe material has increasingly been, shadow banned, deplatformed, and that includes a lot of UFO content. I mean, a lot of other content as well, obviously, but UFO content also. Like, all of us in the UFO field, like, we all can see, like, it's much harder to get the growth in the channels is a lot harder to get, it seems to me, this is my own perspective, than it was even a few years before. So you got to think that there's something going on here with the algorithms. And so the control over the narrative is one reason that we can say we haven't seen that avalanche effect, because I think it has inhibited the movement of a global conversation, right? And then the other reason, and I think that's significant, and then the other reason, I guess I would say, is the global cultural war that is also happening, because this is something that clearly is distracting a whole lot of people. They got other things on their mind than just, are UFOs real? When both sides are getting apocalyptic about the other side, and seeing legitimately serious, scary developments, each from their perspective, happening. So I think those are the two reasons. But I think the main one is that it's the control over the narrative that has still been able very, very expertly to be maintained. There are alternative voices. We're still out here, but it's harder for those voices, even than it was 10 years ago, I think, is my opinion, to get their information out. So I think that's what has happened. So then I can ask myself, all right, so how can a UFO breakthrough occur? Well, one of the things we're looking at right now, of course, is the current status of the upcoming UAP Task Force Committee that the U.S. Congress and Senate we're told, they are working on this. UAP, UFO Task Force, which we are told is charged with coming up with a report to present, in theory, to the public, to Congress, right, on significant UFO encounters that have had national security implications. And so we're told this is going to be all being collated, put together, and going to be presented, and supposedly in June. Now, I was talking actually a few weeks ago about this with Jimmy Church, who gave me his opinion that he didn't even think that the report was mandated. that was only suggested or something like that. I didn't know that to be the case, and I don't know that to be the case. What I have been led to understand is that there's certainly going to be a portion of that, and we don't know what portion of that report, that will be classified. So there's that. So how much of it will be unclassified for you and me to read? That's a really good question to ask. Probably, I'm going to guess, not too much. But another question about that upcoming task force to ask, frankly, is what information are they really going to have access to? Honestly, what are they going to get to? I mean, will they have access to, all right, all of the military's UFO reports that have been gathered through all the different agencies? Let me tell you, when I said earlier, I'm in the volume 3 phase of my series, UFOs in the National Security State. And as an aside, I'll just say I'm really into it. It's been fascinating research. It's very satisfying for me to be diving into that. It's an overwhelming amount of information. And one of the things that I'm deep in the weeds on are current UFO reports. Obviously, I got to, really go into that. And what I have seen is an overwhelming number of high quality, like really decent and often well attested UFO sightings by people around the world. Around the world. I mean, I would say more in North America than elsewhere. I think North America has really got the best UFO reporting infrastructure. But they come in from everywhere, and they're extraordinary from everywhere. And in fact, many of those cases have like claims of like seeing a helicopter chasing after UFOs or jet fighters engaging with these things or chasing after them. Like there's quite a few of these military type engagements. Now, look, these are often reports that are not really fully investigated. Okay, fair enough. But look, let's just get real here. There are so many of these coming in, and many of them are quite detailed. I think it's just ridiculous to dismiss them. There's too much there. It's too obvious. And so what I'm saying here is, it is obvious to me that there are thousands and thousands of high quality, well attested UFO encounters that happen every single year around the world. And so I asked myself, how many of those are going to be included in any UAP task force report? What sliver of percentage of those are actually going to be covered? And you've got to assume that with the United States military, they've obviously got the capability to track all kinds of stuff that ordinary people just don't even have a chance of tracking. Satellites that are out there that are designed to track anomalies in the atmosphere. That's what they're there for. And we know that U.S. satellites have been doing this for many, many years. I wrote about this in volume 2 of UFOs in the National Security State. We know this is the case. So the UAP task force, in theory, will have access to an overwhelming abundance of UFO data. And I mean, does any one of us honestly actually believe that anything but the tiniest fraction of those events are going to make it into the report? I mean, honestly, I don't think so. On top of that, as I have been talking about for the last almost year and a half, more than a year and a half, almost 2 years, as anyone who's had a cursory analysis of the Thomas R. Wilson document written by Dr. Eric Davis back, almost 20 years ago, that I was shown in 2006, that a lot of people know is totally legitimate. Any decent analysis of that document will show that there's deep, deep privatization of the UFO phenomenon and secret that goes beyond normal government channels. And that is impervious to genuine, legitimate government oversight. And look, that's an open and shut case. The privatization of the UFO secret is a significant and necessary thing for us to discuss if we really expect to get anywhere with this thing. And so is the Navy UAP task force going to go there? Does it expect that it's going to go into Lockheed or Raytheon or GE or any of these other high-level contractors that certainly have important information there? No, of course not. They're not going to have access to that. If Admiral Thomas Wilson, who was vice head of the intelligence of the Joint Chiefs of Staff in 1997, was denied access after demanding access to get into to have oversight of those programs, when the gatekeepers of that program told him to take a hike, and when he complained about it, was threatened with his career. And he's, running intelligence for the Joint Chiefs. If he can't get access, do we honestly think that a congressional Senate task force is actually going to have the ability to do that? Like, not a chance. Not a chance. And then the other thing is, will they have the ability and willingness to go over what I have been calling the red line of disclosure? I did a whole YouTube video on this a couple of months ago. What is the red line of disclosure? The red line of disclosure is crash retrievals. That's the red line. Now, we have, in the last 3.5 years, been flirting with that red line. The last New York Times piece, written by Leslie Kane and Ralph Blumenthal back in last summer of 2020, was a very interesting article, and it came very close to that line, if you remember. And in that article, this is New York Times, and they said, they hinted, they didn't state, talking about Dr. Eric Davis, and they talked about, possible crash retrievals, alleged crash retrievals. And it's like, whoa, they're getting really close. Now, I consider that the red line, because it's one thing for the Navy or for any armed service to say, there's a phenomenon that's out there and we don't know what it is. Like, that's powerful in and of itself. True, it is. But that type of a statement has not created the avalanche effect of disclosure that I have often envisioned, and that we envisioned in After Disclosure in the book. That's not enough to just say, oh yeah, there's something out there, we don't know what they are. Could be Russian, could be Chinese. Yeah, sure, okay, fine. No one believes that. No one ever believed that. But you can say that. But to go one step further, what's the next step? The next step is saying, yeah, there's something there, and we have physical craft. We have a UFO, which, of course, I have been talking about this a lot for many years. Starting, go back to the research of people like Leonard Stringfield, one of the real heroes of UFO research. That man, back in the 70s and 80s until his death in 1994, Stringfield pulled out many dozens, scores of really good pieces of testimony and evidence attesting to the reality of crash retrievals, way beyond Roswell. And that's on this YouTube channel as well. You can check those out. But to get into an admission of crash retrievals for an official government, for the United States government to say, yeah, actually we have these artifacts and we've been studying them for a long time. Like, okay, if that ever were to happen, even in our era of totally controlled establishment media, both legacy media and now social media, I'm sorry, I don't actually see how it would be possible, at least in 2021, to stop that avalanche. This is what I believe. I think that an admission that we have recovered UFOs, and let me just lay this out here. I very strongly believe that we have done this multiple times. And so for that admission to be made, that would still be game over for a lot of the elements of this cover-up. Not the whole cover-up, probably. There's always more. But it would be a very big game changer. And that's the red line. And so I think that is a line that will not be crossed. And I also think it's a line that the UAP task force would not be able to cross, even if the people in that group wanted to cross it. I don't think that they have the ability to do it, because I just don't believe that they will have access to that information, because I do believe that is very deeply privatized, or buried in agencies, government agencies, yes, but that have what I've often called legal illegality. That is, they have the ability to hide this completely and forever from any prying eyes, including that of the United States Representatives Congress. So I don't see that task force breaking over that line. I just don't see it happening. I wouldn't be surprised if, whenever this report comes out, we might see some good photographs, possible, maybe some good video, maybe some good reports that would be certainly interesting, and certainly things that we would like to learn about, but that fundamentally would not be game changers in any significant way. Like they wouldn't move us any significantly closer to going over that line. We would still be in the era of, wow, there's some amazing things. What the hell are these aliens? And it's almost become safe for the establishment, it seems to me now, tacitly to say, yeah, maybe there's aliens. Like they're almost there. They're not quite there, but they're almost there. And I've started to wonder that might be a safe place for them in the not too distant future. It's just my guess. I don't have any knowledge of this. Okay. I don't have any inside information, so I'm totally just speculating here. So let me move on here. And by the way, I've been going now more than an hour. This is going to be one of my longer presentations here. So I've still got more to go. So if you got other things to do, you can, since I'm not doing visuals anyway, you can keep it on and, clean the kitchen, do whatever you need to do, and you can still listen if you want. But I've got more to go into here. So I asked myself, so what can UFO disclosure accomplish if it were to happen? And I'll get to how might it happen. We're not done with that. But what could it accomplish? So in the old days, when when we wrote after disclosure, 10 years ago, man, that seems like a long, long time ago, before the Cultural Revolution and before the extreme polarization that has taken place, before all of that, I had hoped that an avalanche of UFO data that would result in disclosure could result in an opening and reform of our current society. People getting angry, saying, what else have you been lying to us about? And passing a bunch of sunshine laws to open the light on the black budget world and to allow us to, regain control over our society to the extent possible. I mean, that was always the hope. And I always believed, and I still believe, that ending UFO secrecy is one of our best hopes for doing this, for stopping this runaway train that is leading us to global totalitarianism, digital totalitarianism. I don't know if it's sufficient, frankly, but I do think it remains, back then and today, a significant tool that we still have at our disposal. And so that was always my hope. Now, the question is, even then, I have to say, I would characterize my hope that it could make the positive changes as kind of threadbare, honestly. But I held it out. I mean, back then, the idea was that the establishment corporate media would resist change, but that the alternative media would be the driving force. And today, now we just see that the amazing clampdown on social media and internet, like Google, that has turned all of those assumptions of mine just totally inside out. So I guess we could say, can a disclosure happen? And if so, can it result in genuine positive change? Well, I talked about the task force, and I gave you my opinion on that. I don't hold out a lot of hope for that. One of the things that was discussed in last summer's New York Times article, I think it was there, and this has definitely been a rumor. It's one that I'm inclined to give credence to. I don't have any proof. But that there are high-level individuals and high-profile, like famous, powerful people, at least a couple, one or two maybe, who've got all the goods on this subject. They know and might have been inclined, or might even be inclined, to spill the beans on what they know relating to UFOs. And that if that were to happen, we are told, or hints are, that that's game over, that's game changer. And, you can wonder, like, who would those people be? Like, who are those individuals who, if they were to say such a thing, would result in such a game over scenario in terms of the UFO secret? I've got a couple of speculative ideas, but I'm not even going to put them out there because I don't know if they're true or not. But I think it's very possible that there are such people. And I think it's entirely possible that they may have even spoken to research, not me, they haven't talked to me, but other researchers or journalists or what have you, so that there may be this kind of undercurrent there of someone who actually knows. So that's actually really possible. And that could be a game changer if that were to happen. Another possibility is, in the research of good people who are in this field, it is my belief that a strong presentation of UFO crash retrievals, there is still time for that to come out before the whole system is just under lock and key for the rest of all time. And if a powerful enough case can be made and be presented to the world, that maybe that could still do it. I nearly titled this talk, I called it, what did I call it? UFOs in a divided, UFO disclosure in a divided world. But I nearly was going to call it, the UFO disclosure window is closing. And it isn't closed fully, but it might be closing. We have enough time for a little while to get powerful information out by good researchers and journalists who are working this field. They're dedicated people. They're still working to dig deeper into this matter. And tremendous information has already come out, but it hasn't broken through the media establishment wall. But I do believe that compelling information on the reality of UFO crash retrievals, possible. It's possible that it could do it. But then the other question that I was asking a moment ago is, like, is UFO disclosure big enough to achieve a positive transformation, to make the changes that I think most of us would like to see. And I guess all I would say is maybe yes, maybe no. But will it be able to occur? And I don't know. I mean, I just don't know. We're maybe 5 years away from the imposition of a truly highly efficient 5G surveillance state that will never go away. I mean, right now in the West, the United States does not have 5G. People talk about Verizon in New York City, but there's no 5Gs going on there. It's not true 5G. So it's not there yet. China's doing it. Yeah, China's already working on 6G, by the way. Okay. So here we are, but 5G will be implemented in the United States, and I'm sure in much of all of Europe and the rest of the world. It's all happening. And I think we can assume that it will be very solidly in place within 5 years, very probably. And once that's in place, it will come with all of the 5G smart devices that are going to be in your home that will suck up all the data in everything that you do for the rest of all time. And so I think once that is in place, yes, there will be holdouts. Yes, there will be people who will be like, screw you, we're not going to do that. But it's going to be harder and harder to avoid. And it will be widespread enough that there's really not going to be any place to hide. It's just going to be there forever. So I think once that is fully in place, that is when we are likely to see a confident crackdown by the global power structure to put to sleep all of these protests that are happening now. And when that happens, I think we're going to see a very significant constriction, even more than now, on intellectual discourse and what is allowed to be talked about in public, and increasingly even in private, because there really won't be private spaces that much. You're going to have to really be creative to find privacy. So I think once that happens, and then, furthermore, it's going to go both ways. So like the state and corporations will be able to see everything that you do, but you will be giving them all of your thoughts and data points and everything else that's going out to them. And they will be in turn able to influence you. You got AI people talking about cognitive implants over the next generation. I mean, Elon Musk is working on it with, pigs in one of his little, media events. And I mean, this is a real thing that's happening. So this is like, as thin as a human hair, apparently, that will go into your brain. That will go into your brain and make you smarter, we're told. Well, excuse me if I don't actually think it's going to make me smarter. I think what it will do is make us under much greater levels of control than ever before. Because not only will you be able to download anything off the global Wikipedia, okay, so you'll be able to do that. Good for you. You'll have access to a lot of data. You don't have to get off your seat and find out if the Mets won last night or whatever you like to, whatever you're interested in. But you'll also be influenced by that other side. Like, who's in charge of the AI that will be managing that whole global network? I mean, that's going into your brain. So it's a control system that is beyond the dreams of any 20th century dictator. I don't think anyone could have imagined the capabilities for human control that we are now staring in the face in the next generation. Whether it will be 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 20, I don't know, but it's happening. So when that is in place, and you need 5G first 5G is totally, absolutely necessary for that system to come into place. But once that's there, and once the physical infrastructure is built around that 5G to facilitate all these fun little things that'll happen with 5G, like vision, virtual reality, augmented reality. You can play video games in your head maybe all day forever. Who knows? Become a celebrity millionaire in your virtual reality world, whatever. But once that's in place, then I do think it's game over for attempts to break through the wall of secrecy. I think it will be increasingly difficult for us to break through that. It's going to be really, really tough, a real challenge. So how long that window is open is a really good question, but I don't know. I don't think it's going to be much more than 5 years. And there's one other thing I want to bring up here. I'm getting closer to the end, but we've still got a little way to go. This is one of my longest ones in a while. One of my longest shows in a while. When I rolled this idea out to my website at Richard Dolan Members just a couple of days ago, I got a lot of great comments. I have to say, like the people who are members of that site, I know a lot of you are in the chat room now. My hat is off to all of those people. The level of engagement just blows my mind. And I can honestly say I learn more from all of the people who are there, who comment, than I think they could ever possibly learn from me. So I'm like the big winner here. I get to learn so much. So there are a number of comments from the earlier version of this presentation that I'm giving you here, that when I gave it on my site. So there's some very instructive comments that I've incorporated into this here. But one of them was paraphrasing the Bill Clinton's campaign chief, James Carville, who back in 1992 reminded Clinton to say, "It's the economy, stupid." Remember that. And so this person was saying, "Remember, it's the aliens, stupid." In other words, advising me not to lose sight over a very important reality that is behind all of this. And he is right. And that important reality is that there is a presence of a group or groups that are behind this UFO phenomenon. All right. So in one way to look at it is, very simply, as I was saying earlier, there are massive numbers of decent UFO reports that turn up every week around the world. So there's clearly significant infrastructure that exists around the world, often operating in the middle of the night, by the way. We're talking sightings at like 2 in the morning, 3 in the morning. A lot of these sightings that people are encountering are dead of night types of things. Not all of them. Some are in the middle of the day. But there's a lot going on in the middle of the night. Lots. So there's a significant presence of someone that has invested a great amount of energy and their equivalent of money to be engaged with this world of ours. Second, and this is really even more to the point, any valid counterintelligence model of this phenomenon, all right? In other words, if you're looking at the UFO phenomenon as a counterintelligence person, like, who are these guys? What do they want? Like, very few people really do that, but I think it's very important. This is what I tried to do, by the way, in Alien Agendas, my last book. I don't know how good I was at doing it, but that's what I was trying to do. So I would say that any valid counterintelligence model of this phenomenon has got to consider this question. And the question is, to what extent is this intelligence behind UFOs embedded into our own infrastructure and our own society? You've got to ask that question. And people who don't study UFOs probably think, well, that's a crazy idea. But actually, it is not a crazy idea. There's so much we don't know, okay? But if we assume that there has been a pronounced presence by some group for the last century, at least, then we have to consider the possibility, maybe the likelihood, maybe the probability that they are very interested in our world. They are invested in whatever activity that might be required by them, that they might have figured out a way in which to guide humanity in ways that they think it needs to be guided. Now, I'm not saying that this is absolutely happening, but I would say that from a legitimate counterintelligence model, like, you have to look at this possibility. And also that they might have found ways to implement that plan. In other words, it is a valid question to ask whether or not our species is even driving this bus. Now, you might not think it makes a difference, like whether our world is being managed by, a kleptocratic, totally human global elite, or a kleptocratic, total alien elite that works through a human global elite. Does it really matter? Or does it matter if if they themselves are walking among us, as David Jacobs famously put it? I mean, maybe it doesn't matter to ordinary people in the long run, but it is a genuine scenario that actually could be true. It could be true. And I'm not saying that it is true, because again, we know certain things about this phenomenon, and there are certain things we don't have full confirmation of. But we know there's someone here that's not supposed to be here. And we know that they've got technology that is not supposed to exist. And we know that they operate globally in very significant ways that are important for them. Like, we know all of that. And so these other questions, I believe, responsible people must ask. All right. Now, but in a world in which we are getting very close to things like cognitive implants, or of AI-dominated algorithms to manipulate our behaviors via channels like social media and the rest, or in which people increasingly become dependent on state handouts in the form of things like UBI, or stimulus checks and things like that, or in which culture wars continue to divide us against each other, in which we are bombarded day after day by distraction and noise, in which our social relationships are increasingly being destroyed, and we are therefore more and more atomized and isolated. And yes, tribalized into our ideological bubble worlds. Okay, yes. In that world, you have to ask, how will ordinary people be able to defend themselves against future draconian actions taken by governments when clearly everything around us is falling apart? Like, that's the situation. Like, we are waiting for the other shoe to drop here. We have gone through a full year now of global crisis, destruction of our economies, destruction of our societies, destruction of our very minds. Mental illness has gone through the roof. People are just falling apart around this world. And this cannot last forever. So something is going to change this. And I do believe it will get much worse before something happens. And when that something happens, I don't know if that's going to be any better. I think we're likely to see, as I was saying before, a clampdown. So there's a window that's open right now, and that window is closing. And so it is this moment that we have where, and I don't even know if it's going to be enough, honestly. All right. I don't know if it's enough, but we have a moment when there's still a chance for genuine truth on the deep aspects of the UFO reality, not the kindergarten version that we've been getting through the media, or we get through movies that clearly are ridiculously ill-informed, but the true, deep UFO reality that even most of us researchers, like, honestly, in our normal analysis of it, I just don't think most researchers really, and look, I include myself here a lot of the times, I don't think we go fully to the core the way that we really need to. And until that comes out, like, that's the only thing that might break things and stop this runaway train that is clearly taking us to a destination that I don't think anyone's going to like. The only way to derail that. Now, maybe there are, other truths that have the potential to do this. Years ago, I thought maybe 9/11 would the truth on that. I'm sure I'm going to get dinged by the algorithms for this just right now for saying this. But I used to think, back during George W. Bush, especially, I thought, well, if this were to come out, then, because I don't believe in the official version, so I'm just going to tell you that right now. But I thought if that were to come out, that maybe that would cause a runaway effect, an avalanche of truth. Well, look, that train left the station a long time ago, and that's done. That's not going to happen. I just don't think so. But the UFO phenomenon is still there. And there's probably a couple of other deep realities that can also be powerful and can have a transformative effect. I don't think it's only the UFO cover-up. And it is a cover-up. Don't be intimidated by people saying, oh, conspiracy theorist, which is one of the most pernicious phrases of our time. And all that is used for is to shut you down. It's the only reason that phrase exists, is to shut you down. But anyway, the UFO cover-up remains one of the very few and still potent, potentially powerful things that can jar open this nightmare that we're all moving into. Yeah, I would say that. Now, it seems like a really bleak presentation, but it doesn't have to be. People have said to me for years, like, wow, you really are bleak, man. And I don't like being bleak. Believe me, I don't like being bleak. I like being optimistic. But I think it is incumbent upon us to face truth and to face the reality. And one thing that we all can do on different levels. So one thing that I really think all of us need to do is to distance ourselves to the maximum extent possible from the insanity that is happening all around us. And one thing we can do is manage our relationship to social media. Like, get that under control. All right. We all know by now how Facebook, how Twitter, how YouTube, how Instagram, and how the rest can damage our relationships with other people and even our own personal mental health. We don't need any more studies to prove this. Like, we know that this is true. You know that this is true. We began using these tools way back when as a way to connect with like-minded people. And that seemed like an empowering thing to do. And it was empowering. And it can be still, but not if someone's going to spend 5 or 6 hours a day on those places, or even 2 and 3 hours. Like, who wakes up thinking, oh, I'm going to spend 5 hours on Facebook today? Like, no one wakes up with that idea, but then they do it. And the reason they do it is because Facebook has their brilliant algorithms in place too. And they know how to give you those dopamine hits. They know how to keep you in there and to turn your cognitive abilities off, and so that you're just scrolling. And it is a drug. And it's filled with its own psychological manipulation. You don't need me to tell you this at this point, all right? We all know this. Like, if you do know this. So we need to find a way. This is tricky. We need to find a way to use the current infrastructure intelligently, so that we are not being run by it. We have to figure out a way to make it our tool and not be its tool. And I realize that might be much easier said than done. You know, there's some people, if they decided to opt out of social media altogether, not the worst idea. That's a pretty smart idea. Usually when they do that, they're like, wow, I feel so much better now. Yeah, there's reasons for that. All right. Because like I'm out of this crazed circus of all these other crazy people around me. Yeah. But then that leads to another question. Like if you opt out of all of that, then how do we find each other? Like us, how do we do this? Like, you know, you're finding me on YouTube. This is how we get together. The chat family is there. I still see you guys. All right. So how do we find other people like us who are at least somewhat awake to some degree to what's going on in a world where everyone around us is plugged into the matrix? Well, I'm not sure I have a perfect answer for that, but consciously stepping outside of that control system seems to me to be critically important and not a bad place to start. It also helps maybe once in a while to actually read a book. I mean, you know, you think about the benefits. I was just listening to a conversation about this not long ago, and it's like, you know, the short-term and long-term benefits of being on social media versus like reading a book. So the short-term benefits of being on social media are that like, wow, you get instant gratification. It's like, wow, people like my post. And like, wow, all these people are out there. Wow, there's this other interesting thing. And then when you're done with it, you're like, where did my brain just go? You know, and you feel fried because you are fried. As opposed to reading a book, which is much more of a consistent effort. It takes more time for that gratification, but you get more out of it. You do get more out of it. In other words, quiet, meditative forms of learning and study are actually better for us psychologically and in terms of our own knowledge base. So those are things that like we can do. And I think at all times and this is hard, but this is really important. Like we have to remain ultra conscious of the system in which we find ourselves all the time. Marshall McLuhan, didn't he say the medium is the message? It's really true. And so when you're on, even here on YouTube, it's like you got to be careful. YouTube can suck us in. Facebook sucks people in. Twitter sucks people in. Instagram, all of these. And so you've got to stay focused on just how these platforms operate and what they are designed to do. And they are designed to pull you in and never let go. And so we've got to be aware. That takes consciousness of that reality. And that's hard to do. It's easy to forget. It's easy. I mean, it's easy for me to forget. I'm sure it's easy for you to forget, but like that's our, like, we got to do that. And then the task remains for those of us who care to do our best on this subject of UFO secrecy and the UFO reality and the presence of others among us. It remains our job to research and present the best information we can on this subject with a view to finding friendly voices out there even in the mainstream, or in the rest of society that will help to get the message out. And sometimes that might mean even using things like social media and like it's kind of a catch-22, but we've got to remember that. And the last thing that I'm going to say, and I am getting close to wrapping this up here now, is like, remember who you are. Remember who you are. You're a human being. You're not a digital commodity. You're a person. You have sovereignty over your mind. Even if you don't always exercise it, you've got it. And you have the ability. You have this ability to reach your most authentic self. It's inside you. I'm telling you, it's there. And you don't always hear it. I don't always hear mine. But if you try, if you really try to find that highest and best part of who you are, whatever that part is, right? It's there. Like, you get into a quiet place sometimes and you find it. There's a part of you that is your best version of yourself. The part of you that knows the truth. It knows the truths about you. And it's hard to reach those truths, by the way, because we spend our lives like we say we want truth, but a lot of times we don't want truth. Like, a lot of times we don't want it. And so the longer down the road of life we go, we block ourselves off from some very difficult truths. And then it gets harder and harder. And you got to go through those walls and through the layers and layers of garbage that are in all of our minds and our consciousness that block us from that best inside ourselves. But that's the key. We got to find that. And we have to, that's what we have got to be. And the best inside yourself knows that the people, first of all, that you disagree with aren't evil. They may be misguided, and you may be misguided. Probably both. We're not all omniscient. And so our goal here is not to fight each other in this critical era that we are in. Like, we're really wasting our energy by getting involved in this ideological, like, I hate you and I hate you. Like, this is not good for us. And it will lead to a crackdown if we're not careful. And just as importantly, it will distract us from the real game here. And the real game is getting knowledge of what is going on and getting that knowledge out so that we can all talk about it. So remember who you are. Remember who you are. And that's what I got for you. Wow, hour and 40 minutes. How about that? I just want to say before you go, remember, if you like this content, please subscribe to the channel. We're so close to 100,000 subscribers. Let's get there. Get me there. Get me there. Crush that like button also if you haven't already. Or if you don't like to crush it, just gently tap the like button. It'll do the same thing. Let YouTube know that you support what happens here. And don't forget to turn on notifications for this channel so that you don't miss any new times that I come on here, because it does still happen. And look, again, I do most of my work these days over at Richard Dolan Members. That's just the reality, okay? But I'm very busy over there. There's a lot that I'm putting up over there. But I still will be here on YouTube. And so if you want to catch me on YouTube, get those notifications on. All right, with that, wow, how about that? That was a long lecture. Hope you enjoyed it. I wish you all a great day, a great evening for wherever you are. Thank you for being here with me. Honestly, thank all of you. Thank you, the chat family. Thank you for members of my site. I cannot tell you how grateful for your support that we are. And I would just want to thank you for that. So catch you all the next time. And hey, let's keep fighting the good fight. Catch you all later. Bye for now.